I'm Theo Broden, co-founder of Hood Research, and I have with me this morning, as promised, Professor Michael Griggs from Wayne County Community College. Good morning.
Good morning.
And as promised, Sleepwalking While Black, Part 2. Into Sleepwalking While Black.
Yes, the cultural dynamics on how the Western culture manipulates us in many different ways. In the book, the subtitle is Understanding the African American Host-Parasite Relationship. So when you sleepwalk, to a great extent, we have become hosts of Western culture. Most of us aren't conscious of this. We have no other consciousness or ideas to compare it to. We have been taught European psychology, European sociology, his historical points of views, his economic philosophy, his philosophy about life, his religious orientation, his language, his walk, his talk, his diet, and the rest. And it becomes part of our day-to-day. And as a result, you'll see all of those areas plus more. You'll see us suffering, our diets. It's a Western-based diet. And doctors, I'm sure I don't have to share this with anybody, but doctors tell us, about the obesity and the high blood pressure and just the bad food. But this is a Western-based diet.
Okay, stop right there. A Western-based diet. When you think about Texas, who's suffering a drought right now, cattle ranches, a big promotion on beef, which is not good for your diet. Beef, hamburger, fast food restaurants. Then it says, well, wait a minute now. We have all of this other stuff called milk. So what do we do about the milk? So the Milk Producers Association started an ad campaign nationwide, over and over again. You have to have your milk. And even in the food pyramid, which has been changed since, by the way, they were making sure that the people got brainwashed to understand how you had to have milk every day and how you had to have your beef, and then promoted the fast food restaurants. So when you talk about a Western diet, that comes to mind right away.
Yes, and the ills that come along with it.
Yes.
And it's one thing that the West didn't lie about. I mean, they call it junk food. And we eat it anyway. You're right. So
it keeps the body from being alkaline.
That's
too,
right. Yeah, the lack of alkaline water, the soft drinks, and the whole nine. And this is what we digest, and it has a negative physical impact on the body. But I think most of us, we understand that on some level, but the ideas that's having a effect on our psychologies, I think that's something else that most of us don't understand, because at least we do have access to fruits and vegetables. That's a choice you can make at the store. Most of us know that's better. But to select better ideas from better scholars and better thinkers, most of us don't know who those people are or what ideas we should be selecting. So understanding that once you digest Western ideas, it has a devastating impact, just like the food. If I can give you an example. In the book, I highlight these doctors who were looking at the reason why black women have a higher infant mortality rate than some third world countries. So they looked, and at first they thought it was economics. They said, well, it must be, they don't have access to health care. But then they found that wasn't true, because they looked at successful, educated women, the doctors and lawyers. They still had a high infant mortality rate, and they had access to health care.
Wow.
So these doctors, after intensive studies, walked away and said, it's the psychological effects of racism, that the baby trying to be developed in an atmosphere where the mother is carrying this conflict, this self-hatred, the high blood pressure and the high sensitivity of dealing with racism on a daily basis, that the babies were dying as a result of having to deal with that. Because everything else suggested that these babies should flourish. You know, the women were making good money, they were gainfully employed, but the day-to-day impact of racism was too much for the fetus, and the babies were dying as a result. So it was the ideas, even though some of these women were eating correctly, even though they had access to health care, the impact of internalized racism was destroying their babies before they can enter this world. Yeah. In Western culture that challenge the very essence of you being here, that degrades you on a regular basis. Even as a black males struggle with this as well. In this culture, regardless of being a professor and what degrees I have, in this culture I am a thug. I am a criminal, I am a thug. The Mexicans are considered, you know, lazy criminals. The Native Americans are considered savages, and the Arabs are considered terrorists. So it's difficult to take part or be part of a culture that degrades you and define you this particular way, and you not have some psychological problems. You see, we all start, you know, to a great extent lacking the self-esteem that we need to have to develop and become mature, productive adults, because we have a culture that assassinates, for example, our character of who we are every day on the news. It shows the worst of humanity. You see, and because of that, it has a psychological impact on us. But I think most of us, to what level and to what degree, most of us are totally unaware. Most of us doesn't make the connections that, you know, our babies cannot develop like they should in the fetus because of ideas that we internalize from this culture. You see, but it does have a toll.
We talk about some of the ideas of our culture within the pages of your book that we should adopt.
Yes.
Okay, talk about
Yeah, some of the one of the things that's the perfect medicine to helping us is our culture and our tradition. Because our mothers and fathers of yesterday, they celebrated the very things the European tries to put down. So the hair, that's something, that's a beautiful thing in black culture. The lips that we have and the skin color that we have, our swagger, our walk and our talk, our music, our rhythm, everything about us from our culture is celebrated. So it helps to offset some of the negative things and the degrading things that Western culture uses to put us down. So we shouldn't be looking for it as a source of strength. We should be looking at what our mothers and fathers develop in our culture as a source of strength. And I would argue that if we look at the pages of history and we look at black leaderships throughout the centuries, that's one thing that all of them had in common. That Marcus Garvey fell in love by reading about Booker T, and it motivated Marcus Garvey to want to do something and become more than what he was. And Booker T tells us in Up From Slavery that he read about Frederick Douglass, and that motivated him to want to do something and become more than what he was. And Elijah Muhammad was part of Marcus Garvey's movement, and that movement, Elijah tells us, motivated him to want to do something. And Malcolm X was connected to Elijah Muhammad, and Huey Newton read about Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King at Morehouse came across his culture, and it made him want to do more for black America. And Oprah Winfrey said when she was in the 8th grade, she read about Martin Luther King, and it made her want to change this world and have an impact like he did. And lastly, our current president, President Barack Obama, he said he was at the crossroads. He said he suffered with self-hate, just like many of us. He said he did not want people to call him Barack early on because it sounded too black. So he told people that his name was Barry. Call him Barry. But he said after studying about who he is and reading about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Civil Rights Movement, it changed his life. And he wanted to be a community activist just like his fathers were before him. And he went back to Chicago and tried to make a difference. So,
and embraced his birth name.
That's right. Embraced his birth name and took pride in how he looked, his birth name, and the whole nine. So it's more than just, you know, reading a particular book, but it is the perfect medicine for what we suffer from, because it really instills in you a certain pride and a connection with your Creator and a rich past that most of us don't know about.
How is it that you think the members of our community can accept themselves as opposed to wanting to be something that they're not? As you notice in the European American community, they're trying to imitate us.
Correct.
They're injecting in their lips and buttocks and breasts and everywhere, trying to get a suntan and,
That's right.
and all. And they're even having their hair braided. You know, so they too seem to have identity crisis.
Yes. Many will argue that, you know, if you have to create the concept of white supremacy, if you have to go around the world and try to convince people that you are better, in actuality, you suffer from low self-esteem. And you do not believe that you are superior as much as you want other people to believe.
Think you
That's
are.
right. That's right. Because nobody in their right mind try to beat people and torture people and set them on fire and lynch them to get them to believe that somehow you're better by doing these things. No, you have serious psychological issues when you do those things. And once, I think we went over this before, I think, you know, one number that should stick out to your viewers is something we went over before, that Europeans are 7% of the world population. 93% of the world are people of color. So when these explorers went out in this world, they didn't see a world that reflected them. They saw people of color. Everywhere they went, all these beautiful people had this vibrant color. And to them, they stood out like a sore thumb. So what did they do? They flipped the script. They said that the majority of the world, those people and how they look, that's abnormal. And normal became this tiny population from Europe. So they flipped it. And a lot of people suggest they flipped it because they felt insecure. Insecure. Because explorers, initially, when they would go places, of course, they didn't take their wives with them. They began to have sex with the local population. And the white man quickly realized that he could not duplicate himself, that some about his traits would get dominated as a result of sexual relations with people of color. So segregation, after understanding that, was important to him because he knew that people of color could genetically wipe him off the planet.
And it appears that some of that is taking place now because of the women's lib that was going on in the 70s and the advent of birth control. And now they're at a zero population growth.
Correct.
So it seems to me that all of a sudden, since they have discovered, and I guess it became more intent when President Barack Obama was elected, that now what they seem to be doing is gobbling up as much power and money as they can.
Correct. That's right. They come from a place that didn't have an abundance of resources, and hoarding resources to them is normal. But this is why the world suffers as it does. 7% of the world population control over 60% of the world resources. You understand? When you have that type of imbalance, this is why people don't have indoor plumbing certain parts of the world, because it's tiny minority. And out of that 7%, it gets even worse. White men are roughly 3.5% of the world population. All combined, they're 7%. But you have this tiny, tiny minority that want to control the majority of the world resources and want people to just starve.
Well, you know, I often wonder about South America, Central America some, but South America as well, and how it is not developed. And we are right across the Gulf and are not helping them. And there's a complaint about Hispanics coming into this country and others as well because they think this is a land of plenty. But if there was an effort by this country to help them develop where they are, where it's been reported they make like 70 cents an hour, there would be no need or desire to come here because their country has just as many resources as this one. And, of course, South America is a whole lot larger than the United States.
True.
So is Canada, by the way.
True.
Go ahead.
But you know how parasites, when you think about the host parasite, parasites tend to prey on the host, to exploit and ravage the host, and where the host lives, if you will. So Europeans, when they went out, one of the terms I put in the book is, colony. And I think, we heard that term, but I don't think most of us understand what that term really means. When you colonize some people, you make them to the benefit of the mother hive, if you will. You see, you colonize them, you colonize their mind, and you colonize their resources. And the resources from colonized people are supposed to go to the hive. It's not supposed to go to the people that you colonize. You see, you're supposed to exploit them. And that has been going on for centuries now. In Africa and South America, these places and these people have been exploited for the benefit of the West, because the West really doesn't have a lot of resources. So as much as we hear people say, well, it's 2014 and this racism needs to stop, it's not that simplistic. If you give the gold back to the Africans, it's the Africans who will control the people, because he who controls the gold controls the people. You see, all the resources that Africa has, if we control those resources, people will be at the whim of Africans. We can decide who has this particular medicine. We could decide who make bombs, because we have the natural resources to make the bombs. That's right, and the weaponries. Ford, who make cars, the platinum, and that exhaust system that people are stealing, the platinum comes from Africa. The copper in our homes that we use to plumb our homes, the copper comes from Africa. The silver, the uranium, petroleum, all of these things. So racism is more about the control of natural resources instead of just hating someone. But you use that to justify the hate. So you can get the rest of society, white society, on board and say, well, let's just hate these people. And once you get folks to think about hating folks, then you can do anything to the people who you have taught the society to hate.
They spend a lot of time pimping the community, in other words, and other nations as well.
Yes, they do.
Because when you have a small number such as that, I think we talked about this before, who was in this country allowed to vote, allowed to own land, allowed to run for elective office, and that was... Go ahead.
Yeah, that fly is trying to get some of this information too.
Yeah, we're going to educate the flies.
That's right. And and they created this system when you think about voting, education. And again, we romanticize where we are now, but just remember, only the white male for centuries could receive education, could be the person in political office, could wield political power, could own land, have access to wealth. They really made this thing and this system set up for him. Now today, we see disproportionately, he is the one who still has political power. He is the one who still owns the majority of the land, who has the majority of the wealth, and who has the majority of the power here in America. It was created for him, and this has helped him to stay in the power. But the thing is, what's crucial is he educate the masses to support the system, to support and maintain the status quo.
So he was preventing the female European Americans from being educated and participating as well.
Oh, as well, for centuries. Yeah, and we saw the tail heels of the Salem witch trials, but they have this thing in history called the Great European Witch Hunt, which he used to hunt her down as well, had dogs chasing her, setting her on fire, and what have you, before he got access to us. He was doing this to his own women.
Own women.
Yeah.
And Sojourner Truth was fighting for women's equal rights when she was on the earth.
Correct. Correct.
And the European Americans would send for her to come and speak to their large groups, and she was well loved. She really, really was. And she had a lot of networking that she did. She knew William Lloyd Garrison. She knew Harriet Beecher Stowe. She knew attorneys. And I've mentioned this before, that she sued the government twice and won. She sued a newspaper and won. and she fought and traveled the upper 1/4 of the United States mainly, and helped, as I said, to fight for women's lib, which the right for them to vote did not happen until 1920. After she had died, of course, she moved from the New York area into the state of Michigan, where she lived the last 30 years of her life up in Battle Creek, which, by the way, is where our gubernatorial candidate Mark Shower comes from.
Yeah, she was a phenomenal woman.
Professor Michael Griggs is from Wayne County Community College. He teaches black history, he teaches black psychology, and he teaches black politics. And what would you add to that?
Well, one thing, I don't want us to give up on these schools, because I want us to remember that we are paying and subsidizing the education that's not working to our benefit.
Right.
Now, we are in those schools. We are principals in those schools. And most of us need to organize to the extent where we go and challenge these schools to stop giving our children an education solely about white people. You see, if we teach our children only to respect and listen to the views of white folks, then they come out and in life, that's what they do. And we complain about how they don't respect and listen to us, but keep in mind, we're not teaching our children to listen to us and respect us. And we're paying for this, you see. Now, other groups who have come here, like the Arabs, when they got to Dearborn, when they began to matriculate in great numbers to Dearborn, they immediately made these schools address their needs and foster their agenda. They were really strong. They have a strong culture about themselves, and they made these institutions that they were paying for in their community meet their needs. So now those schools are speaking Arabic. They have food at those schools that reflect the history of Middle Easterners and the Mexicans. They did the same thing with Southwest Detroit. Now these schools are speaking Spanish and what have you.
Right.
Every community, when they go to a place, most of these institutions were set up for white people. But these other groups, when they get here, they go and they agitate those institutions to make those institutions meet their needs. That's something we have not done yet.
But you know what else I noticed is that they work on economics. They establish businesses. They may be small and then they grow. They employ their own.
Correct.
And then over time, the Europeans that were around them found that they were not having the support financially from the Arabs that moved into the area, and their businesses dried up. They had no choice but to either shut down totally or relocate in another part of the county.
That's right.
Or state among their own European Americans or white folks, that they would get the support. And then in that instance, when they had established and have established businesses, then that gives them the income to even provide private schools, private recreation centers, private mosques, and what they need. And then, as you were saying, to agitate so that the public schools accommodated the needs of the people within their community. So we, in my opinion, need to be more mindful of supporting the businesses that we have and establishing more African American businesses so that we can do a similar type of thing. And that includes supporting WHPR.
And making these schools and other institutions reflect and meet our needs.
That's right.
And right now they're not. But we're paying, we're subsidizing our own oppression.
Right.
We are paying for these schools. And to a great extent, most of us have been content with the lack of dealing with these schools. We have been content with them going along, perpetuating this agenda. But we all know it's not meeting our needs.
That's right.
So it's our inept attitude towards dealing and challenging with these schools. You have another comment, too.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Okay.
Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Your name and how you're viewing us?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Thomas. I'm watching from Comcast 20.
Thank you for calling in. Yes, your comment, please.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
A little bit. But
Okay, go
the
ahead.
professor mentioned the inroads that the Arabs and the Mexicans have made, for instance, in the Detroit metropolitan area when they got here, and that black people aren't doing that. In the last century, black people instituted communities and programs and businesses that benefited them all over the country. And what happened? This system of white supremacy, military machine literally destroyed them. My question to you, Professor, is there is an abject fear of black liberation in this country. And don't you agree with that? And the forces that run the world seem to stay up all night trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And when it does even get close to that, they come in and destroy it.
Yes, we have had that history, and no doubt they have not only did that to us, but they've been trying to do that to other people. Some of the things that we can do, for example, as an educator who taught for the Board of Ed before, it's disheartening that studies tell us that we watch television more than any other group. We go to the movies more than any other group. But as a group, we will not show up for parent-teachers conference. We say we do not have the time. Now, this is something that no outside entity is stopping us from doing. Right now, they said we have less adults involved in children's lives than ever before in the history of humanity. There are less aunts and uncles and adults involved with individuals, young individuals. Again, there's no outside group that's stopping us from doing that. From investing in our community, supporting one another in the institutions, there's nobody outside our home stopping us from going to the local businesses in our community, to invest in our community where our children play, where our children go to school. So, yes, there are some things and some forces that we must identify and say, hey, that's a real barrier. But there are other things, being involved in our children's lives, dealing with the schools to give us a better education. These are all things there's no outside force doing that. The fight right now is within. Can we change some of these practices where our children can see us at their schools? Can we go to parent-teachers conference? Can we feed them better? Can we stop having McDonald's and Burger King their primary diet? Can they eat other things? Can we go down to the Eastern market and buy fruits and vegetables, as I do on the weekend, to feed our children so they'll live a long life? Now, there are some things I understand with, some external forces, but there are other things that we can do that can make a difference right now. How about reading? Can reading be an exercise that our children see us do as adults? Not just have us tell them to read. That's right, to read. Now, these are all things that we can do that can make a difference right now. And there's nobody stopping us from doing that but us.
Well, the other thing is we need to spread the good news about what our young people are doing who are into positive activities. As an example, we have almost 200, if not more, young people who not only play chess, but they win chess tournaments, not only in the city, not only in the state, but in the nation. They are winning. How often do you hear about it? I mean, maybe once in 9 months you may hear about it. And they travel around the country to chess tournaments. Then you have the young children who have won the robotics competition. And they're from right here, the city of Detroit. How often do you hear about that? Correct. And there's a beautiful place, and I need to check to see if it's been torn down by the emergency manager at DBS. But 6 Mile and Grand River, where they're about to put Myers, there was a museum of African robots, kings, queens, and you would go through. It's a small museum, and the robots would talk to you and tell you about themselves. It was beautiful, and hopefully, if they had to shut it down because of Myers, that they would move it to the Charles Wright Museum of African American History.
Yes, yes, and so many other things that take place in our community where you see the positive things. You see very few black people engage in those things, unfortunately. You see, because we have been conditioned.
Right.
And there's nobody in their right mind can sit back and say that collectively we're doing the best for our children. If that was the case, they wouldn't be dying in the greatest numbers.
Exactly.
They wouldn't be dropping out in the greatest numbers. They wouldn't get the worst grades in the greatest numbers. They wouldn't be incarcerated in the greatest numbers. We wouldn't average about 1,500 abortions per day.
Oh.
You see, we wouldn't have these numbers if the adults, again, there is a real empire, no doubt, who have all their policies in place to try to undermine our progress. But there are some things that we can do that can keep our children living longer.
Engaged.
That's right.
Yeah, well, two things. One, the DIA has practices on Friday evenings, I'm told, for young people who want to learn chess and practice their craft. And secondly, a friend of mine was telling me about going to Chicago, and they seem to have a practice of the students in this school who have been determined to be disruptive or perhaps incorrigible. They make them wear orange vests. Now, who wears orange jumpsuits? Orange, except the prisoners. So they are preparing them to get on the highway to prison. I mean, when I heard that, it was disgusting. That's a practice that's going on in Chicago.
Yeah.
Not trying to help the young people change, but identifying them. Well, I guess they need to, since we have private prisons for profit.
That's right. A reality, again, that a billion-dollar industry set up to prey on our children, to lock them up and exploit them.
And on the stock
That's
exchange,
right.
by
So
the
what
way.
do we do about this reality? Do we continue to ignore these racist practices, or do we confront them to help keep our children viable and productive?
Got to. Ground. We are at the end of Sleepwalking While Black, Part 2. My guest today has been Professor Michael Griggs, an educator at Wayne County Community College. I suggest that those of you who are 60, you can take classes free at WC3. And Professor Michael Griggs teaches black psychology, black politics, and
Black history.
Black history. All right. My name is Theo Broten with Hood Research. And remember, it's not necessary for you to know everything. What is necessary is for you to know how to find what you need when you need it.